September, 9 AD. In a dark forest in northern Germania, 25,000 Roman soldiers, the best soldiers in the known world, are marching straight into death. And the man about to kill them isn't an enemy general, isn't some barbarian king, isn't even someone Rome doesn't know. He's Roman. He wears a toga. He holds Roman citizenship. He was trained in Rome's armies, ate at the tables of Roman generals, learned military tactics from the best instructors the empire ever produced. And now, he's about to use every bit of that, every lesson, every secret, every weakness he learned from the inside, to destroy 3 entire legions and bring the Roman Empire to its knees in a single weekend. His name was Arminius, and what he did in the Teutoburg Forest wasn't luck. It was the most carefully engineered ambush in ancient history, a trap so perfect that Rome never tried to conquer that territory again. Ever. Stay until the end, because the way he deceived Rome is jaw-dropping, and how this story ends will make your stomach turn. To understand the scale of this disaster, you need to understand the scale of Rome at this moment in history. The year is 99 AD. Emperor Augustus sits at the height of his power. Rome isn't a fragile republic anymore. It's a perfected war machine that has spent decades conquering territory after territory. Egypt, Hispania, Gaul, parts of Britain. And now, the next prize on the list is Germania, that vast region of dense forests, swamps, and wild tribes east of the Rhine River. For years, Rome had been pushing that frontier. Back in 12 BC, the legions crossed the Rhine and took territory from several Germanic tribes, creating what they called Germania Magna. The plan was clear: Romanize this land, impose laws, impose taxes, impose Roman culture on people who had lived completely differently for generations. And the man chosen to run this new frontier was someone named Publius Quinctilius Varus. Varus wasn't a battlefield general. He was an administrator, a well-connected politician, married to Augustus's own great niece, who had previously served as governor of Syria and as a Roman consul. The kind of man who knows how to negotiate, manage tax collection, run a courtroom, but who maybe should never have been handed command of 25,000 soldiers in hostile territory. And that exact miscalculation is what cost Rome one of the worst defeats in its history, because Varus treated the Germanic tribes like a people already conquered, like the war was already over. He enforced Roman law, demanded heavy tribute, and, according to records from the time, used crucifixion with alarming frequency just to maintain order. The problem is, the Germanic tribes didn't feel conquered. They felt occupied. And occupation breeds resistance. And at the center of that resistance stood the one man Varus trusted more than anyone else. To understand how this ambush was even possible, you have to go back almost 20 years before the battle. Arminius was born around 17 or 16 BC, the son of Segamer, a chieftain of the Carusi, a Germanic people living between what's now the German cities of Hanover and Osnabrück. And when Rome invaded these lands, it did something it did often. It took children from local noble families as tribute, political hostages, essentially, and shipped them off to Rome. Arminius was one of those children. He grew up inside the Roman system. He received Roman military training. He earned Roman citizenship. He was promoted to equestrian rank, a significant honor for a foreigner. He fought alongside Roman soldiers in military campaigns. He ate Rome's bread, wore Rome's uniform, swore loyalty to Rome. And in the process, he learned firsthand exactly how the most powerful army in the world thinks, moves, and reacts. When he returned to his homeland, now under Roman control, Arminius became a trusted advisor to Varus. The governor saw him as living proof that Romanization was working, a civilized barbarian, a Germanic man who had essentially become Roman. But behind the scenes, Arminius was doing something else entirely. He was visiting Germanic tribal leaders one by one, planting the seed of an alliance. He knew something Varus didn't, that isolated tribes, acting individually, would never stand a chance against Rome. But united tribes, coordinated, striking at the exact right time and place, that was an entirely different story. And here's what separates Arminius from your average rebel. He wasn't planning some spontaneous outburst of rage. He was engineering, months in advance, a surgical trap, because he knew exactly what Rome feared. He knew exactly how Rome reacted to rumors of rebellion. And he knew exactly what kind of terrain would turn the greatest military force on earth into a blind, trapped, helpless mob. There was just one problem. Someone knew what he was planning. And that person tried to warn Varus. His name was Segestes, a noble from the same Cherusci tribe as Arminius, and, in a cruel twist of irony, his unwilling father-in-law. Arminius had kidnapped and married Segestes' daughter, Thusnelda, without the father's consent. The two men already had plenty of personal reasons to distrust each other, and Segestes, whether out of genuine loyalty to Rome or personal resentment toward his son-in-law, went to Varus, more than once, and told him, essentially, Arminius is plotting against you. He's organizing a conspiracy among the tribes. Arrest him now, before it's too late. Sit with that for a second. Rome had the warning. This wasn't some vague rumor. It was a specific name, a direct accusation, repeated more than once, and Varus completely ignored it. Why? Because Varus trusted Arminius blindly. He saw the young Romanized Germanic man as living proof that his project to civilize Germania was working. He was so confident, so secure in the belief that peace had been established, that Roman historians of the time described his attitude as bordering on dangerous naivety. And that exact kind of overconfidence is precisely what Arminius knew how to exploit, because a man who never fears an attack is, paradoxically, the easiest target there is. A paranoid general sends scouts ahead, keeps battle formation, expects the worst. Varus did none of that. And this is where Arminius's trap enters its final, most brilliant phase. In late summer of 9 AD, Varus's 3 legions, the 17th, the 18th, and the 19th, along with auxiliary units, totaling somewhere between 15 and 25,000 people counting soldiers, cavalry, and the civilians traveling with the army, were wrapping up their summer camp near the Weser River, deep in Cherusci territory. It was time to head back to the winter quarters on the Rhine, a routine march repeated every year. And it was at exactly this moment, the most convenient moment possible, that Arminius brought Varus the news. A distant tribe, possibly the Angrivarii, was rebelling. Action needed to be taken fast. But there was a problem, Arminius said. The normal military road back to the Rhine was long and direct. To deal with this rebellion along the way, it would be far more efficient to take a detour, a different route along the northern edge of the Weser Hills and through the Teutoburg Forest. Stop and think about what's happening here. Arminius isn't just lying about a rebellion that doesn't exist. He's choosing, with surgical precision, the exact terrain where Rome is going to die. He grew up in that land. He knows exactly where the forest narrows, where the swamps swallow your feet, where the hills give the high ground to whoever strikes first. And then, and this might be the boldest move in the entire operation, Arminius asks Varus for permission to temporarily split off from the Roman column. His excuse: he's going to gather local Germanic auxiliary troops to help crush this rebellion. Varus says yes. Arminius rides off, and he doesn't come back to help Rome. He rides straight to his own people. At that exact moment, somewhere in that forest, Arminius met up with his Germanic allies, the Cherusci, and likely elements of other tribes he had spent months secretly recruiting. The force he assembled probably numbered somewhere between 10 and 15,000 warriors, outnumbered by the Romans. But they had three advantages worth more than numbers: terrain they knew by heart, high ground, and the most devastating element of all, total surprise. Meanwhile, Varus kept marching, blind, straight into the forest. Picture the scene: a Roman column of 15 to 25,000 people stretched across miles of narrow, muddy trail inside the Teutoburg Forest. They weren't in battle formation. They were moving like a caravan, soldiers mixed in with supply wagons, servants, and even the wives and children who illegally traveled with the legionaries, despite military rules forbidding it. It was raining. Mud slowed every single step, made it heavier. The large rectangular shields that made legionaries unstoppable in open field battle became a liability between trees, roots, and dense brush. The formations that made Rome unbeatable on open ground were completely useless here. And then, at the exact moment Arminius had chosen, the attack began. From every direction, from the trees, from the hilltops, from the shadows of the forest, came waves of Germanic spears. The legionaries, trapped in a line too long to regroup, could barely tell where the attacks were even coming from. Every time they tried to form a defensive line, the terrain betrayed them. Mud, roots, brush too thick to move through. Germanic warriors struck in fast, brutal bursts, charging down the slopes near Calcrease, hitting and pulling back before the Romans could organize a counterattack. This was exactly the kind of guerrilla warfare a formal, disciplined army struggles to handle most. Not because the Romans were weak, but because their very strength, coordinated formation, needed open space and visibility the forest simply didn't offer. And here's the most unsettling detail of all. Arminius knew exactly how the Romans would react to every move, because he had been trained to think exactly the way they did. Every defensive maneuver Varus attempted, Arminius had already predicted. The Romans managed, with brutal difficulty, to build a fortified camp on a hill, surviving the first night. But the relief didn't last long. The next morning, the survivors did something desperate. They burned their surplus equipment, abandoned most of their wagons, and, in one of the darkest details of this entire story, left their most badly wounded behind, likely killing many of them to spare them from capture and torture at the hands of the Germanic warriors. By then, they knew exactly who was attacking them. The Cherushi had been identified. Arminius had likely already been spotted among the enemy combatants. The only question left was where to flee. Backtracking along the known road by the Lipa River was longer, but familiar. Pushing forward toward the Ems River, or toward the supposedly friendly Frisi territory, was shorter, but unknown and risky. They chose to push forward, and it was a fatal mistake. For 2 or 3 more days, the Roman column, now reduced, exhausted, running low on supplies, under constant rain that ruined their bowstrings and made the ground even more treacherous, kept getting attacked, day after day, in relentless waves. Every day that passed brought more neutral tribes flocking to join the winning side, drawn by the smell of a historic victory forming right in front of their eyes. At the final point of the battle, in what's now the Calcrease region near Osnabrück in Lower Saxony, the Germanic forces finally cornered what remained of the Roman army in a narrow corridor between a hill and a swamp, a perfect funnel of terrain built for slaughter. The Romans had no room left to maneuver, no formation left to defend, no hope left of escaping. And this is where Publius Quinctilius Varus, the governor who ignored every warning, who blindly trusted the very man orchestrating his destruction, did the one thing he saw as honorable. He drew his own sword and took his life, refusing to be taken alive. Several of his senior officers did the same. When the dust settled, The result was almost impossible for the Roman Empire to process. 3 full legions, the 17th, the 18th, and the 19th, were wiped out. Estimates put the total dead somewhere between 20 and 30,000 people, counting soldiers, auxiliaries, and civilians. Some of these legions were never reformed. Their numbers were permanently retired from the Roman army, an unprecedented gesture that tells you exactly how deep this trauma cut. The silver eagles of the legions, the sacred standards of every Roman military unit, losing which was considered the ultimate disgrace, were captured by the Germanic forces. It would take years for Rome to recover even some of them, and the survivors who were captured. The Roman historian Tacitus records that captured officers were sacrificed to Germanic gods. Others were enslaved, some held in captivity for decades, with accounts of prisoners from Varus's legions being found and freed as much as 40 years later, during a later Roman campaign. When the news reached Rome, Emperor Augustus reacted in a way ancient historians described in striking detail. According to the historian Suetonius, Augustus was so shaken that he went months without cutting his hair or beard, a traditional sign of deep mourning. He reportedly, in moments of anguish, literally beat his head against the palace doors, repeatedly crying out a phrase that would echo through the centuries. "Quinctilius Varus, give me back my legions." He declared that day an annual day of mourning. And for the rest of his life, by most accounts, he never fully recovered from the shock. Why such an extreme reaction from the most powerful man in the known world? Because Varus's army represented a massive chunk, somewhere between 10 and 20%, of all of Rome's frontline military strength. This wasn't just a tactical loss, it was a structural wound to the body of the empire itself. Rome responded with absolute urgency. Tiberius, the future emperor, who was busy wrapping up a difficult revolt in Pannonia, was forced to postpone his own triumphal celebration and rush to the Rhine. The frontier's defenses were reinforced up to 8 full legions, with troops pulled from provinces as far away as Hispania and what's now the Adriatic coast. Years later, between 14 and 16 AD, the general Germanicus led deep revenge campaigns into Germanic territory, devastating settlements, defeating armies led by Arminius himself, and recovering 2 of the 3 lost eagles. He even visited the old battlefield and arranged for the proper burial of the scattered bones of the Roman dead, a gesture of honor, late but meaningful. But here's the most important turning point in this entire story. Despite those retaliation campaigns, Rome never again tried to permanently reconquer and occupy the territory east of the Rhine River. Augustus and later Tiberius made the deliberate decision to turn the Rhine into the empire's permanent border on that side. They built a defensive frontier system known as the Limes Germanicus and simply stopped trying to push forward. And that decision has consequences that still ripple out 2,000 years later. Because if Rome had won that battle, if it had consolidated control over Germania the way it did over Gaul, Hispania, and Britain, those lands would have been Romanized. Local languages would likely have evolved in a completely different direction, possibly descending from Latin, the same way they did in so many other regions Rome conquered. In other words, if Arminius hadn't won in that forest in 9 AD, it's entirely possible the German language, as we know it today, would never have existed in the form it does. And by historical extension, some theories suggest even modern English itself might have developed very differently. One ambush, engineered by a single man over the course of months inside one forest, had the power to redraw the linguistic and cultural map of an entire continent. And here's the final irony, the kind of detail that makes this story feel like fiction, but it's completely real. Arminius, the man who united rival tribes to destroy the most powerful army on earth, kept fighting Rome for years after Teutoburg. But the unity he had built to win that one specific battle didn't last. The same Germanic tribes he had brought together against a common enemy gradually slid back into rivalry and mistrust. Exactly the kind of fragmentation Rome had always known how to exploit. And Arminius's growing power started to frighten the very Germanic leaders who had once followed him. They feared he was becoming too much of an autocrat, accumulating influence and ambition far beyond what an alliance of equals should ever allow. In 21 AD, just 12 years after his greatest triumph, Arminius was poisoned. By whom? By his own Germanic countrymen. Possibly, according to some accounts, by members of his own family. The man who outsmarted the Roman Empire, who orchestrated the destruction of 3 entire legions, who drove Emperor Augustus to smash his own head against palace walls in grief, didn't die fighting Rome. He died at the hands of the very people he had united to win that war. The Battle of the Teutoburg Forest isn't remembered just because Rome lost. Rome lost other battles before and after this one. It's remembered because this particular defeat carries an uncomfortable lesson at its core. Blind trust is one of the most powerful weapons that exists, and it can be turned against you by the last person you'd ever expect to suspect. Varus wasn't beaten by a stronger army. He was beaten because he trusted the wrong person for too long, even after receiving clear, direct warnings that something was wrong. And Arminius didn't win because he had more soldiers. He won because he understood, from the inside, exactly how his enemy thought, and used that knowledge with surgical patience over months, waiting for the exact right moment. 2,000 years later, archaeologists are still digging up the battlefield near Calcrease, uncovering coins, combat masks, belt buckles, and bones that confirm, piece by piece, the accounts ancient Roman historians left behind for us. If this story gave you chills, drop a comment. Do you think Varus ever had a real shot at avoiding this disaster? Or was he doomed the moment he decided to trust Arminius? And if you want to understand more about how entire empires collapse because of a single wrong decision, there's another video right here on the channel you're going to want to watch next.